Okay, let me get started and be very Swiss here in timing-wise. Goedemorgen. That's it? All right, we can definitely do better than this. I practiced the whole night saying Goedemorgen, so I need to be better than that. Okay. Goedemorgen. Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Thomas Maurer, and I welcome you this morning at Ignite on Tour again. Happy that you all chose my session. I don't really know why you come to my session, but that's fine. So it's all about, this session is all about implementing and planning a hybrid network connectivity, right? And that's what I'm going to talk about. So first of all, again, my name is Thomas Maurer. I work as a cloud advocate for Microsoft. Now, stunningly, 1.5 months. I think I started, around 1.5 months. I'm pretty new to the team, but I'm super excited. It's super fun. You probably know me before from the MVP community and things like that. So, perfect. When I came here, first of all, they told me that I should probably not do some inappropriate jokes, right? And gave me some speaker training things, what to do on stage and what not to do. They also told me I cannot bribe my audience anymore with Swiss chocolate. I'm like, okay, that's bad. However, I have some stickers, which I will provide to the audience. I don't have thousands of them, so I don't have only a couple of them. So if you then join after my sessions or my sessions in the afternoon to the Microsoft booth over there, and ask me for some stickers, I will happy to give them to you. I will give you all of the stickers I have. Yeah, perfect. So you're sitting here in the learning track for hybrid cloud, right? And you will see that we will talk about the Tailwind Traders as a demo company and what they want to achieve. And over the next 5 sessions in that track, we will tell you, okay, look, that are the steps you need to take, starting with the hybrid networking. So some background to Tailwind Traders. They are a company, they have a significant growth. They're an existing company that have on-premise investment, so they have some stuff on-prem, but they're now moving to the cloud because they want to use the benefits of the cloud. So they do need to do a couple of different things, including networking. And that's basically the story we'll go through in those 5 sessions in that learning track. Good. So this session has a couple of learning points we want to spend time on. First of all, assessing a hybrid network, the requirements for hybrid networking, right? This is very important. If you do any project or sort of project, it's super important to basically know your requirements. And then we will show you how to overcome and plan some of the network configurations and plan the integration of that, and show you some of the features, how you can do high availability and performance improvements, and we walk through this kind of network design. But first of all, before we start talking about the networking part, so why actually does a company go a hybrid cloud, right? Why would we not just move everything to the cloud? Why just we stay on-prem? I think there are multiple reasons for that. And if you today probably are a startup, you probably be a cloud-only company, right? If you start fresh, you don't have any legacy, depending the industry you're in and the things you do, you probably start in the cloud. However, that's not how most companies today operate, right? We have a legacy, we have on-premise systems, so that's definitely a point. So definitely we have some workloads on-premise, we want to connect to Azure, we want to leverage the benefits a cloud can have, right? Like spinning up new virtual machine basically instantly, scaling down, scaling up, all that stuff. So we need to make sure that our on-prem workloads can actually talk to our workloads running in Azure. We need to be secure and need to be reliable. You don't want to end up in a situation where your main workloads rely on the cloud and suddenly you cannot access it anymore, right? For some network disconnect or something like that. So we need to plan that carefully and see what hybrid cloud networking are we implementing. And there's not one right answer, as you probably know. If you worked with cloud, there is not one way, or if you worked in IT, there's not one way of doing it. There are multiple ways of basically doing it depending on your needs and requirements. So first, let me talk a little bit about what we actually offer. So first of all, we have this massive global network. I'm sure you have heard of that. We have like 54 Azure regions worldwide. We have hundreds of thousands of miles of fiber optics all over the world. And this is basically our Microsoft backend, which we use for our Azure services, but also offer for our customers to use that as well for their workloads, right? And next to that, we also offer a ton of Azure networking services, right? We will not cover everything in that session. So for example, we're offering protection service from denial of service attacks, firewalls, security appliances. In terms of delivery, we basically have like CDN, content delivery networks, load balancers, and things like that. We also offer a rich set of monitoring solutions to make sure that you know what's actually going on. And then we have our connect part, and this is basically the thing we're going to talk about today. This is like virtual networks, virtual WAN, ExpressRoute, VPN connectivity, just to make sure that how do we actually connect our on-premise system to the cloud. And those are the services we'll spend time on in the next couple of minutes. So first of all, it's very important to assess your hybrid network requirements, right? As I said before, it's very important to understand what are your needs, what are you planning to put in the cloud, and what are you relying on, and things like that. This is very important. So you have to think about different things, and just to make sure what's involved in all the networking part, if you think about it, this slide shows pretty good what, like, a lot of technologies which are involved. Some of them you will not really touch, like you will not really need to think about it because we as Microsoft provide it to you. So for example, if you look at our smart FPGA NICs, for example, or our Sonic, which is our open source networking operating system, those are things that are just there, you don't need to take care of. However, if you move more to the right, you will see Azure Virtual Networks, load balancers, firewalls, your peerings, your internet connectivity, and end-to-end monitoring solutions. Those are things we as customers of Azure, we need to think of, right? We need to plan, we need to have a look at how do we connect, how do we do that. So we have a couple of questions. So the next thing, I'm really going to through a list of questions you have to ask yourself, basically, if you're setting up connectivity. So first of all, do workloads hosted in Azure, are they only be accessible over our corporate network? Or are they also accessible from the internet, right? Do I, for example, host websites or web apps which are in Azure, which I want customers or employees to access from everywhere? So do I do that? The next thing is, do I need to restrict workloads I'm running in Azure from accessing the internet, right? Today, you're probably working for a company which server systems do not really have access to the internet. So do I need to do that in Azure as well? And how are we going to do that? The other thing, does the Azure network traffic need a single entry point? Do I need to check, like, do I want to have the single entry point, or can I have multiples of those to get better performance out of it? And another big question we have, and I think that's also a big topic in the Netherlands, as well as in other countries in Europe, we see that a lot, is, are we trusting traffic over the internet, right? Are we trusting traffic going over the internet? This can be compliance or even regulations, reasons why we need to have a look at this, right? And we have a couple of decisions to make about that. So what traffic types go through public internet, right? We can still encrypt those. If you're, for example, using HTTPS, we can encrypt the traffic from one point to the other. We can use VPN with IPsec tunnels, for example, to encrypt the network traffic. Or we can use ExpressRoute, and I will talk later in the talk a little bit about ExpressRoute. What this actually means is a private connection to Azure and not crossing the internet, right? It's another option. And the third option can simply be that workload. I don't trust that going through communication anyway outside of my building, so probably that workload stays on-prem, right? So there are certain decisions we need to make if we can have the traffic flow going over the internet. One thing I realized when I did projects with customers, one thing a lot of time people think it's not that important, we do that later, is IP addressing, right? So we need to be sure what are we actually doing with our IP addresses. We have existing on-premise IP addresses. We need to make sure that we know what they are and that they're probably not going to be overlapping with the IP addresses we use in the cloud, right? We don't want to end up in situations where we gave like 2 servers or 2 systems in different clouds, or even on-prem the same IP address. So in the cloud, this becomes important as well. So we need to do an architecture and figure out, okay, where do our workloads run? Do we need public IP addresses for our services, or are they just all internal, as mentioned before? And then how many of those, and do we need to protect them like from outside using application firewalls and things like that? And another thing is, if you're a company with multiple locations, do we need to have a connectivity just to Azure from each of those things, or do we need to have a branch talking to another branch, and not one location to, like sharing data with another location, or just do we do that with Azure? Another thing to think of, and that's where I like, by the way, to mention something, is very important to me. I have seen a lot of implementations out there, customers just starting, because in Azure you can really start really quickly to deploy virtual networks, VMs. You're really super fast. Deploying is not the challenge and not the time-critical part anymore. It's designing stuff, right? So what I see from projects, they moved from classical infrastructure projects where we did a small design phase, where we have written the concept, the architecture, and then we had a couple of months of deployment, to a completely different model where we still do the architecture, and then the deployment only takes probably a couple of days because everything is so fast and it's so easily to do. So the design becomes even more important, right? If you do a mistake there and you deploy production workload, making the things go away and changing everything is more work than just the deployment, right? So make sure they do the design for everything right. And what I do with we did with most customers, is we started drawing a Visio, where we basically did a visual design of the architecture, and we took that and then deployed it in Azure with different ways you can do that. Okay, something else we need to talk about is also namespace and name resolutions. One thing I learned working in IT, it's always DNS. So this becomes also very important. So if I have connected my on-premise network to Azure, I want to make sure that actually a server running on-premise can actually reach the servers running in Azure, right? So we have to think about name resolution. We just don't want to talk with just IPs. And then, in addition, there are probably some remote clients connecting to VPN to your on-premise site. So you want to make sure that you connect that as well. Good. We have some other questions we need to go through. Is the on-premises deployment across multiple locations? So again, do I have different locations, not just one headquarter? Is that something we need to take care of? Is the Azure deployment we do for certain reasons in multiple regions? This can be performance reasons, which you can actually have, like you deploy workloads closer to your customers. Or it can be disaster recovery regions, where you say, okay, my workload is running in West Europe, which, by the way, is the best region ever. And then I have a disaster recovery, for example, to North Europe, right? So in case one Azure region is failing or something, or workloads are failing, I can still do that. And then if I have multiple sites, do they all need to have connectivity to Azure? Or is it just, for example, my headquarter, right? And then, again, what do I use? A VPN connection or ExpressRoute connection from each of the Azure regions if I use multiples of those. Good. Let's start with the basics here. I think probably in that room, and I like that about the Netherlands, a lot of people already tried Azure and they played around with it, or even working in production with it. But there are also a lot of, in that learning track, new people to Azure. So I want to show that first of all. So let's talk about virtual networks. This is basically a secure boundary a network design between different services. And the services running in one VNet are basically isolated from services running in another VNet as well. You can obviously have multiple VNets in your subscriptions and in different regions. And you're basically, I think the limit is a couple of thousand VNets you can have there. In those VNets, you then can create like virtual subnets, which allows you to do segmentation of your different workloads. And we're going to have a look at that, how that looks like. So first of all, virtual network, you choose a custom IP address space. This is a private IP address space you choose to basically say, OK, those are all the IP addresses. And this is, again, very important. Usually what we have is customer defining an IP address space and say, OK, all those IP addresses, they are reserved for workloads running in Azure, right? Makes it very easy, like in design phase, I say, OK, this VM has this and this IP address because it runs in Azure. Good. Another thing is Azure and virtual networks are assigning IP addresses to those VMs automatically. There is no need for you to deploy a DHCP server in Azure, right? Azure Virtual Networks and the software-defined networking we use in Azure, if you create a new VM and you join it to a virtual network, it will automatically get an IP address from that virtual network and from that virtual subnet. And then again, as I mentioned, you can do segmentations using virtual subnets. So you can say, OK, I want to have a front-end subnet, a middle-tier subnet, and a database subnet. And you can then use network security groups to basically lock down those subnets and say, OK, the front end can only talk to the middle tier using that specific port. And again, the application tier can, for example, only use the SQL port to basically connect to the SQL Server database system or cluster in the backend. So that becomes also very important if you want to do some sort of segmentation. And it also does some name resolution. You manage basically the DNS servers within the virtual network. And they get assigned automatically when you deploy a new VM. So let me quickly show you a quick demo. Nothing super fancy, but we're going to get started. How to create a virtual network. So this is the Azure portal. I hope everyone has seen that one. I already went to virtual networks. And what I do is basically just simply say, add a new virtual network. I give it a name. Let's call that AMS. Net. And then it gives me an address space. I can choose that one, or I can change it to whatever I want. I can have basically everything like whatever I like or whatever I think for the design is important. There is no need for like different customers to have different subnets. This is all multi-tenant. You choose your subscription. You give it a resource group. So I will ignite. Like let's create a new one for this. AMS demo RG. And then I need to create a default subnet, which is basically the first subnet it will use for VMs, right? It does not make sense to have not a subnet because I cannot use it with anything in there. And then you can also see that this is a /24. So if I zoom in, and my address space, which is a part of that /16 address space. The next cool thing, and I want to quickly highlight that, I cannot talk too much about it, is the service endpoints. So if you're using Azure services like Azure SQL and things like that, they're using usually a public IP address. And if we have the discussion about staying just on, like with our private network, we don't need to expose anything to the public internet. We can now use service endpoints for different services. And we can say, OK, for example, I do Azure SQL. I expose that only to my service endpoint from that virtual network. I can do that as well. Perfect. And then we create that virtual network. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's just select SQL, for example, or disable it. And I create that virtual network. And in a couple of seconds, I have the virtual network and the network created. So for those who haven't worked with that yet, what is mind-blowing is if you're coming from the on-premise world and you needed to do that with your networking team, right, on-premise, that took probably to create a new network, a new VLAN, that depending on your processes and structure and organization, that takes a lot of time, right? So in Azure, that really can take, the cloud can really speed things up here. Okay. So with that, go back to the slide. No worries, that was the simplest demo I had. I was saying. Okay. So how do we have that virtual network now in the cloud. We can deploy services in that virtual network. How do I now connect from on-prem? And I have basically 3 primary connectivity options to connect it. First of all, I can use VPN. I can use ExpressRoute. Or I can even use and extend it with ExpressRoute with VPN failover. Right? Those are basically the options I have for that. Okay. So I can deploy a site-to-site VPN from my on-premise network to Azure. So usually I have an on-premise network, I have servers, I have network appliances, I have clients in my on-premises network, and I have a gateway, which I then can use to do the connectivity. I have an Azure subscription with a virtual network in there, the things I just created. And I can then create a virtual network gateway and connect that using site-to-site VPN to basically reach the services and servers I created in that virtual network, right? Very simple. That's basically, I would just do the same thing if I have 2 offices and I want to connect them to each other. The same principles apply here as well. So this can look like this. If you look a little bit more in design phase, so you can see we have like 10.1 in Azure. Behind the virtual network gateway, those are the 10.1 networks, are our virtual networks in Azure. And then we have our on-premises side, 10.101. These are basically our networks we use on-prem. Good. So a couple of things to deploy the site-to-site VPN connection. So we need a device, obviously, on-prem to do that, or an appliance to basically do the VPN connectivity from our network. We give a guarantee of 99.9% availability, but only for the VPN gateway, right? Since you're connecting over the internet, we cannot guarantee you the internet connectivity. We cannot tell you that we are not responsible for the end-to-end scenario in that case. So we can only tell you, okay, that's the SLA we give you for our VPN gateway running in Azure. And then something else to mention is that VPN connections, one connection can only go up to 1 gigabyte. So probably we need to do multiple connections to overcome that limitation. And then this is basically encrypting the traffic which goes over the internet from our on-prem network. So again, we quickly go and have a look how that can look like in a full deployed environment, how we do that. So first of all, our on-prem network, again, with servers and our gateway. And then we have the virtual network in Azure. We create a gateway subnet. This is a subnet inside the virtual network, which we deploy the gateways on, right? The gateways get an IP address out of that subnet, and I will show you that in a second, how that works. This is a predefined subnet, and it also needs to have that specific name, right? You cannot change that name for the VPN gateway subnet. And then we have our other subnets, as I mentioned, for the web tier, business tier, and data tier, which we have, for example, load balancers in front of it to basically distribute between the networks. Good, so let me quickly show you how you create a virtual network gateway. And for that, we have a quick video. So here is the network the Tailwind traders use. And if we go in here, the first thing we need to do is basically add an additional subnet. Right? So we go in here, and you can see there is a button called Gateway Subnet. You can use that, and then the name is grayed out. That is where the subnet where our virtual network gateways get deployed. I can define the range there, the IP addresses, whatever I like, and deploy the specific subnet. Again, this will take a couple of seconds to deploy. And the next thing is now I actually need to deploy a virtual gateway, right? So I'm going to deploy that. So let's say create a new one. And then you can see here that I need to give it a name. I can also choose the type. I can use, say, VPN or ExpressRoute gateways. I can do route-based or policy-based VPN configurations. And I can also select the SKU. So there are different SKUs, and I will show you that in a minute, with different performance and availability levels. I can now say, OK, I want to connect it to the specific VNet I just created. And I can also, if I choose the right SKU, I can say I want to have an active VPN gateway deployed in Azure instead of an active-passive configuration. I can give that VPN gateway a public IP address, or I can use an existing one I already used in Azure. And then I can just go and deploy to do so. This will now create the virtual network or VPN gateways in Azure. And with the magic of video editing, it's already there. For the people who didn't know the time it takes it can take it up to an hour to deploy a virtual network gateway. This is because in the backend we deploy kind of like virtual machines which do the VPN configuration or basically the gateways. And then I can go in now and do the VPN configuration with my on-premise side and manage that. Good. So this subnet I talked about, this will basically host, as I said, the IP addresses of that virtual gateway to use. Some hints here. Do not deploy any other workloads in that gateway subnet. It is only designed to be used for this gateways. As mentioned, it needs to be exactly called gateway subnet. And the size of it is recommended to be /26, 27, or 28, depending on your needs. But those are basically, it doesn't need to be a 24 like in the demo, depending on how much IP is used. And please don't assign any network security groups to that subnet, right? If you have other subnets, you do that. That's one of our best practices. But don't do that to the gateway subnet. Otherwise, you will break things. I was talking about the different VPN SKUs. This is a print screen from the Azure website, the documentation page, which is, by the way, fantastic. So you get there the information which SKU to choose. You can also think that they have different pricing depending on what I pick, right? So I can see here different gateways, and I mentioned that a gateway only can have 1 gig, but a gateway can have multiple connections, right? So you can go up and take the highest SKU. You can have 1.25 gigabits throughput for that gateway. However, again, it needs to be then multiple connections. So VPN is one thing, but what if I need like a little bit something like, let's call it faster or more secure, or I don't want to go over the internet? There's something called ExpressRoute, right? This is our solution which basically connects customer and gives them a private connection to our cloud services. So what it does, it gives you more performance, usually more throughput, lower latency, and again, no traffic over the internet. There are 2 flavors. One is the Azure Private Peering for virtual networks, the blue one here. This is the one which you can think of like replacing your VPN connectivity, just the same things I just did. There's also a flavor which is called the Microsoft Peering. This can be used to peer to Office 365 and Azure services which use public IP services. Like if you do a peering, for example, if you use Azure Backup or Azure Backup as a service, those can be leveraging those peering solutions. So quick question in the room. Who is using ExpressRoute in their company? Awesome, that's good. That's what I like. A lot of hands going up. That means that those companies are usually very serious about their Azure and cloud deployments. So ExpressRoute, it offers up to 10 gig, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, of connectivity. Again, it's more reliable, it's faster, and it has lower latency than when you connect through the internet. I mean, in the Netherlands, you're pretty close to your West Europe data center. However, think about other countries which are further away. They have sometimes a lot of latency to an Azure data center. That's why we are bringing the data centers closer to the customers. And again, traffic does not pass through the public internet. And here, we can give you an SLA for the entire connectivity. Together with the service provider you're using or partner you're using, we can guarantee you an SLA all the way down to your connection. So what are the challenges with ExpressRoute? ExpressRoute is not available in all the locations we are offering. There are some specific ExpressRoute locations and regions where we can go to. It can be complex to configure. The people who just raised their hands probably know what I'm speaking of. And it's a little bit more work than just deploying a VPN gateway. And there's usually a third-party provider involved in building the connectivity to Azure to do so. And it usually also needs, like if you want to go up the channels with 10 gig networking and things like that, you also need a little bit more equipment than you had before with a 1 gig link, right? So how does an architecture with ExpressRoute look like? So this is the same thing we just talked about a little bit in our talk, extended with ExpressRoute. So again, you have all your on-prem network with a gateway. And then you have something called the ExpressRoute circuit, which is basically the configurations from the local edge routers to the Microsoft edge routers. And then you have basically the same thing as you had before with the gateway, the virtual network, and your application tiers. And what we can also do is, in case of that fails, we can create a VPN gateway as a backup or failover scenario. So when that connectivity, which is usually highly redundant, if that should fail, we can still set it up and use a VPN gateway to do that as a fallback. So for those who already deployed workloads, it's like, Thomas, yeah, but who only deploys a web tier, a business tier, a data tier, just like that in Azure, and does not have different departments, does not have different teams. We probably use multiple virtual networks and things like that to isolate different things. Do we need then have a gateway for every single subnet or for every single VNet? And so if you're a little bit more with that, we have the hub and spoke model, which addresses exactly that. So think about, you have an on-premise network again, you have your Azure subscription, and you create something called the hub VNet, where you deploy your gateways in, and also some shared services like domain controllers or other Azure services in there. This can be basically your shared subscription. And then you have other ones, right? You have, for example, a VNet or a subscription for a specific application. You have a VNet for example, a specific team, or a subscription for a specific team, which creates a VNet where they deploy their services, and then, or for a different service as well. And then we use, we use VNet peering to basically peer to that hub network, so all the traffic gets basically routed over that hub network, and we have connectivity to our on-premise network using the same gateway, right? I'm sure a couple of people in the room have deployments like this. This is definitely something to do when you're doing that at scale. Good. Something else to mention, at Ignite last year in Orlando, Microsoft announced ExpressRoute Direct. This gives you a direct connection to Azure with up to 100 gigabyte. It's designed for customers which have this massive data requirements, or for service providers which probably have multiple customers which want to connect to Azure. And again, it's right now in preview, so you can basically contact us and talk to us about that ExpressRoute Direct. Another thing we also announced back there is ExpressRoute Global Reach. So you can use our backend network basically and connect with ExpressRoute to also connect your different locations using ExpressRoute. And then the next announcement, and this is already GA, a part of it is already GA, is Azure Virtual WAN. So you can imagine if you ever set up the hub and spoke model, you know that's still a lot of work, a lot of configuration happening. So we try to make that easier, and words like SD-WAN, or we call it virtual WAN, come here to help. So what you basically set up a hub in a region, and then you can connect VNets, you can connect different offices, branch offices, ExpressRoute connections, even point-to-site connections. Today, it's supported with VPN connections, and or it's generally available with VPN connections and VNets. ExpressRoute and point-to-site connections, I think, are in preview or will be coming later to that. But it should make it easier. And it can be even automated. So if you do a new location or add a new location, you have an automated setup to do that. And the next big thing you have also is you get a dashboard where you have a great overview of all the locations, all the services connected to that hub network. Fortunately, we cannot spend too much time on it because I have a couple of other things I want to show you. But this is a pretty cool way if you want to do it. And it also works together with, for example, Azure Firewall, which we will talk in the next session a little bit about it. Good. So those are the things when you think about networking, you should have a look at. Right? There are a couple of things, and you can see we can go from virtual network, which is a very simple example, then all the way up to a hub and spoke design and using virtual WAN and other technologies as well. But we have other things as well. So let's talk a little bit about hybrid networking. And you're probably all familiar that Windows Server 2019 was released. Together with Windows Admin Center, we offer something called the Azure Network Adapter. And what that does is basically it's designed for your single server instance where you host somewhere at a service provider in one branch office where there's no real need to deploy a VPN appliance or something, but you still want that server to talk to your Azure services, right? So this can help, and basically what it does, it sets up a point-to-site VPN connectivity with the Azure Virtual Network Gateway. So for that, I want to quickly do a demo on that one. So I have here a VM running on my notebook here, right? And this is just a simple Hyper-V VM, no tricks here. It's Windows Server 2019. And I want to connect that to my Azure services or my virtual network in Azure so that it can talk to VMs. So let's have a look quickly at that VM. I'm running Windows Admin Center on it. For those who haven't seen it, this is basically a web-based server manager where you can manage your servers, multiple servers of those. You have a replacement for local-only tools. You can see I have some metrics here about what's going on. I also have some tools here, if I can zoom in, like registry and things like that. How cool is, by the way, a web-based registry editor? Just saying. The only thing I did in that demo, which I prepared, basically, was I already set up the Windows Admin Center to be connected to Azure or registered with Azure, right? I use this registration so the Admin Center can now directly deploy services and configure services from this console. I don't need to go to the Azure portal to do that. So what I have in Azure, I have a VM, the VM01, which I want to connect to from my system, right? And you can see it does not have a public IP address. And if I go to the network configuration, if I zoom in here, oh, sorry about that. To do this. OK. Go back to that. So you can see I don't have a public IP address, but I have a private IP address. Now, what do you think what happens if I ping that IP address? Surprise, I will not be able to access that server running in Azure from my system here, right? Because how would that work? So when I go back to Windows Admin Center, I have an option here under the networking tab to basically create a Azure network adapter. Click on that one, quickly the login screen. And this now allows me to set up this point-to-site VPN connectivity. I basically choose my subscriptions. You can see I see all the subscriptions with my account. I can then select the specific region where we deploy things and choose the best region again. I then automatically see all the virtual networks which are running in that region or I have created in that region. You can also see the AMS network I created before. So on, I can choose one of these networks. And if I choose a new network which does not have a gateway deployed, it will automatically ask me what kind of gateway do you want to deploy. If I, for example, select one which already has a gateway, the fields are obviously grayed out, and I can basically not change that because the gateway already exists. I can then say, OK, please auto-generate a self-signed certificate, or please use some other certificates I provide. I already created that, so I have my Azure Network adapter here. You say at the moment it's disconnected. So what I can do here is I can click on Connect. This basically starts up the site-to-site VPN connectivity. And when it works, yes, they're successful, you will see that I now have connectivity to that VM directly from my machine here. Which is pretty cool if you have those single server systems, you quickly want to do something, or you want to, even in the long term, connect that to an Azure network. Very simple, completely baked into Windows Server and Windows Admin Center. I'll quickly go back to the slides. OK. The next thing, there's not just moving traffic over VPN and ExpressRoute, right? We can also use Azure services to do so, and we can leverage HTTPS connections to do that. So we have a hybrid file share solution there, which we have to basically help you with those file servers you may have. So who has file servers? Who is using file servers in the company? I think all the hands usually go up. That's good. We use technologies like DFS and DFSR to, for example, replicate. So who is using DFSR to replicate? OK, awesome. Lots of hands. Who likes using DFSR to replicate? Oh, well, a couple of hands. OK, but still, yeah, it's not that much fun, I think. If you see this, you will definitely like this better. I can promise you that. So we have some challenges again. We have DFS or DFSR for the replications. We have problems, for example, that volumes run out of space, right? We need to check all the time, do we still have enough space on our file servers, or our monitoring solution gives us the information. However, we need to check that we have enough space. And data can also get corrupted, and then we need to restore and basically go from a backup and things like that, and usually restoring a large amount of files on file servers also takes a while. So again, what we are addressing with that is replicating files and folders and making them available to all the locations you want to. We want to make sure that your volumes do not run out of space. So you say, OK, I set up a file server, 10 terabytes of storage. I want to make sure that even if people store massive amounts of data, I don't want to run out of that. And then what I also want to do is make the backup process a little bit easier. And better, especially also for disaster recovery when you lose a server or lose the whole file server. So what we have here basically is Azure File Sync. That's the thing basically which addresses that. So think about having an on-prem file server. This one is in New York. We call it Server 1. And obviously, clients are accessing that file servers. Users are accessing that file server's applications. They use SMB or NFS or whatever. It's a normal Windows file server, as we had. It can also be a Windows file server cluster. So what we want to do is we want to replicate that file server to Azure Files. Right? Azure Files is basically an SMB file share, which is hosted in Azure, and we want to replicate that data to there. That has a couple of advantages. So first of all, we can do cloud tiering. So we can say, OK, I want to keep, I have 10 terabytes of storage. I want to only use 8 of them. 2 of them are kind of like a reserve. So all the old files I have, files which are probably older and not used for 30 days or even longer, I want to tier them off to the cloud. Right? They should stay in the cloud. If someone wants to access it, we get it down from the cloud. You can access it. You can work with it. But if I don't need it, then it's stored in the cloud and does not take any disk space on-prem. Another thing is we have cloud access. So whenever, for example, someone needs to have access to the file and the file server is, for example, not available, I can also go and access that Azure file share directly from a machine if I want to, if I have the right credentials, obviously, and things like that. And then what we also allow is to do multi-site replication. So we can replicate that file server, that specific file share, to another location. Let's say it's server 2, which is hosted in Seattle. So we can replicate that. So both of those offices have the same type of files at all the time available, right? And then why we store the files in Azure, so why not just back it up using Azure Backup? So why not just take the whole file share and back it up in Azure? And then this has some other advantages. So what if, for example, now file server 2 fails, right? What I'm going to do, I can say, OK, everyone can go home. We will see you tomorrow, maybe, if the restore was fast enough. With Azure File Sync, what we do is we set up a new server. We install the Azure File Sync agent and connect it to the specific file share, and it immediately downloads all the metadata. So all the folder structure and the files are basically there. So people can already see them and access them. And when a person accesses that specific file, it will download it directly from the cloud. So you have a super fast disaster recovery for your file servers. And then you can obviously say, I want to cache the newest files again. And if it has time and bandwidth, it will download all the files again. So that's pretty cool, right? It's kind of like I compare it with, I don't know if the team likes that, but I compare it with OneDrive for servers or file servers, right? So what do we need to do to set something like this up? It's pretty easy. So first of all, we deploy a storage sync service. That's what we call basically the container where we add all those servers and file shares. We then install the Azure File Sync agent and register our servers, our Windows servers, to Azure. And we create a cloud endpoint, which is basically the Azure file share, where we put where all the stuff gets stored in the cloud. And we create a sync group using those servers and the Azure file share, make sure they are in sync. And I add that first server. And then we can add other servers to it as well. Right. That's basically the steps, and I'm going to show you that in a quick demo, how that looks like. Before we do that, here are some of the requirements. You basically just download this Azure File Sync agent. The portal will walk you through. The only thing we need, basically, in terms of network is outbound of port 443. It can be configured also using a proxy. I highly recommend that you update the agents when there are new versions available, because they improve performance and reliability, obviously. So let's switch quickly to a Azure File Sync demo. So here we go again. Let's first create that File Sync service I was speaking about. So that's very simple. We just select it, give it a name. We choose, again, a resource group or create a new one, and then we deploy that File Sync service. This will take a little bit of time. And when the deployment is done, I basically can go and things like that. So next thing, I install the Azure File Sync agent on the Windows server. I downloaded that already. I go basically to the installer, do next, finish. Go through, and I have that agent installed. Now, this is just the software, the piece of software we are using. Now, the next thing we need to do, we need to register that server. So we can see that in Azure. So I need to authenticate with my user. This is only a one-time thing. This is just to have the right thing. Obviously, going to use multi-factor authentication to do that. Select the subscription. And then I pick the resource group and the storage sync service I just created. Right? I select that one, so I can have multiples of those, different servers, different sync groups, and things like that. And now this server is registered. Now, the next thing we need to do is creating that cloud endpoint, which is, again, a storage account with an Azure file share. So we create a storage account in Azure. Give that storage account a unique name. If you're lucky, it's unique. Create that one. Again, this will take a couple of seconds to create that storage account. Validate. And when the deployment was successful, I go and can quickly have a look at that storage account. If I then scroll down to Files, to Azure Files, I can go there and can create a new file share and call that tail docs and say create. And then I go back to the Azure File Sync service to basically go and add that file share to the sync group. So first of all, we create a sync group, making sure that all the file shares in that sync group, those are the file shares which get synced. I select the storage account I just created and use specifically the file share I just created. This is my cloud endpoint which I want to use. And if I go back to the server, you can see on the blue server I had 3 folders. It's now already syncing, so I add the server to that. I take the first server, that's the blue server. I say, OK, the path, and you have seen those 3 folders, right? So those are the 3 folders which are hosted on this FS02. Enable cloud tiering. OK, I want to have 50% of the volume, should be empty. And I want to cache all the files which are newer than 30 days. So now I added my first server. It's provisioning, and it says, OK, it's synced. So if I now go back to my file share, guess what? Those 3 servers I just had on the blue server, they showed up, right? They were synced. They are now synced to that Azure file share. If I modify them, they will show up there. Now let's go back to the sync group and add another server. I now add the purple server, which had no files on it, right? No folders in that scenario. And again, configure cloud tiering. Enable that. Again, configure caching, the way I like it. And again, it's a provision. And if I now go back to my server, the purple server, it now also has those 3 folders. And the blue folder, the blue servers as well. So now let's create a new folder. Folder 4. And let's go to the purple server and create folder 5. If I now hit refresh, you can see I have all 5 folders on the purple server, and I also have all 5 folders on the blue server, right? And obviously, this does not just work with folders. This also works with files as well. So this is basically a super easy way now to replicate those files. And you can see now with that demo, you can see why I call it like a little bit of OneDrive for file servers, because it does apply the same principles. It syncs your folders. It has tiering and all those options, just for a little bit more bigger amounts of data. For those who have the look at Azure File Sync, you probably have seen that there is a limitation of the Azure file share, which you can deploy right now. I think at Ignite, we announced that Azure file shares become bigger, I think up to 100 terabytes. So if that was the case, we could not really use it because your file shares were bigger than, I think, 5 terabytes. You can now, as soon as it becomes available, you can use that with your file servers. Good. So we have a couple of minutes left. I want to do some housekeeping here. So in this session, we basically talked about what are your hybrid networking requirements, how do we connect our hybrid network using VPN and ExpressRoute. We talked quickly about the Azure Network Adapter, which is built in Windows Server, which does a point-to-site VPN connectivity to Azure environment. And we also had a look at Azure File Sync, which basically helps you to, with your file servers you deployed, and they have different locations and backup and disaster recovery. So if you want to learn more about those topics, I highly, highly recommend our docs, which have here, we have created a list here of our docs to the specific topics, like, for example, the virtual networks, VPN gateways, Azure File Sync, site-to-site VPN connectivity. That's one thing. The other thing, you can download this presentation, and you can get like the code and everything. Everything is open source, so you can go and get that stuff and rebuild it in your own environment, especially the demos if you want to try it out. We have the next 4 sessions in that learning track. One is about securing your Azure network environment, which is in the auditorium, which I will be heading to it right now after that session. And then we have other very fantastic sessions in managing and maintaining your environment, Azure governance, and also the last session then of today, business continuity and planning. So very important. That is also something I learned by working for Microsoft now. Session evaluations are super important. I definitely want to come back to the Netherlands. So please fill out your session evaluation. Tell us what we can do better, but also tell us what we did well. And then I also want to give a shout out to our team. We run a blog called itopstalk.com. We are focused on IT and cloud operations. And we basically cover topics from Windows Server, but also Azure IT Pro topics as well. If you have any interest in a blog or something, just let us know. We monitor the hashtag ACOps on Twitter. So if you have any questions, you can always bump that out and use that hashtag, and we will see if we can answer it. And then obviously, also follow me on Twitter and follow that great, fantastic blog. So with that, thank you very much, and hopefully see you in the next session. Thank you very much.